In this video, I'm going to be reading a story called Tribes. It's about what happens when a college or university gets rid of its beloved but offensive Native American mascot. People fight about it. And in the story, the idea of tribes has different meanings. So, you could think of Native American tribes, you could think of tribes of Native Americans fighting cowboys or army guys. You can also think of other conflicts, wars between men and women, wars between husbands and wives, even the differences and conflicts between people who are part of a big academic community and people who live outside of it, the townies. So, tribes, all of those things. I hope you enjoy it. Her husband sometimes called her the old ball and chain. This when they were out with friends, when there was an audience. It was supposed to be funny, or rather, it was supposed to be hostile, but you had to pretend it was funny. There were other such pronouncements, a whole catalog of marital humor. The little woman, my better half, the missus. Irritating, archaic teasing that her husband knew very well was corny and annoying. It was meant to show how arch, how amusing he was. Other wives rolled their eyes in sympathy. Other husbands smirked. She smiled a certain kind of thin-lipped smile. She'd get him back for it. Oh, yes, she would. Who better than she knew how to puncture, deflate, dismiss him? Ball and chain. She was a bullet with his name on it. All these years married, you might as well stick it out. It wasn't as if either of them was going to get a better offer at this point. And divorce made money disappear. They could barely afford to keep one house going, let alone two. Both their kids were in college. The debt went on for miles. They weren't actively miserable together, at least not most of the time, just low-grade disappointment, and the sense that each of them had concealed their true nature back in the early days, had charmed and persuaded, pretended to be amiable and loving, even as all the while they strove and plotted towards their ultimate goal, to have her own way in everything. It was an election year. His guy won, her girl lost. She was not allowed to forget this. But look how awful the man was, she argued, how unprepared, uncouth, etc. That didn't matter. I won. Look at the things he said and done, the boasting, insults, lies. Her husband didn't care about any of that. I won. This meant she had lost. That was the whole point. Everything between them was a contest, a battle, a war. He wanted to dance on her grave and pick his teeth with her bones, didn't he? He complained that she was always saying things like that, morbid, over the top, bitchy. Don't call me bitch, she said. You haven't seen bitch yet. Her husband gave her a look that had some sadness in it. Why are there so many unhappy women? That's all you ever hear about, how bitter and dissatisfied they are. That's an exaggeration, a distortion. It's why people didn't like Hillary. She was always complaining about something. One Sunday morning, while they were eating breakfast, except that they did not eat Sunday breakfast the way you might imagine, that is, both of them sitting at a kitchen table with coffee mugs and the Sunday newspaper draped here and there. Instead, he had gotten up first and made his coffee his way, which was unpleasantly strong and acid. Of course, he refused to prepare it any differently. In retaliation, she had purchased an expensive espresso machine and installed it on the kitchen counter where he was accustomed to buttering his bread. He had snagged the newspaper first and made a mess of it, scattering it all over the floor in the television room, so that she had to enter what had become his territory, the kitchen was hers, and stand there while he pretended not to see her and gather up those sections which he had finished reading or did not care to read. Sometimes, as today, he might wander into the kitchen after her to retrieve a section he'd relinquished by mistake or wished to revisit. "What?" she said, looking up from the page. He'd spoken, but she had not heard him. She had been engrossed in the mugshots from the county jail. It was one of her secret pleasures, a lurid hobby. None of the people in the mugshots were guilty yet, since there had been no trials, but none of them looked innocent either. They faced the camera with blank or sullen expressions, though there were a few grins from those who were being booked for DUI. They had, some of them, outlandish hair or distressing facial tattoos, or both. They were charged with retail theft, drug possession, failure to appear warrant. There was a lot of domestic battery, and some of those charged were female. This interested her. "What?" she said again, looking up from the page. I said, "Idiots." Which idiots? There were many in her husband's world. "They want to mess with the chief again." He thwacked a section of the newspaper against his thigh, agitated. "What are they doing now?" She always made it a point to respond calmly to the various outrages that consumed him. Calmness drove him crazy. "Now they want the band to stop playing the war chant." "I didn't know there was such a thing." "Of course you do. They play it when the chief enters. But we don't have the chief anymore. They retired him. The war chant is all we have left, and now a bunch of politically correct—" He paused, searching for the right cutting insult. "Professors want to ruin that too." The chief had been the mascot, no, the symbol, his fans insisted. Mascot being one of those guys in dog suits or tiger suits or what have you, with oversized heads and fixed, vapid cartoon faces. Symbol was much more elevated and respectful. The symbol of the big state university here, going back to the misty times before the Second World War. For all those years, a designated student had dressed up in fringed buckskins, or some suitable fabric substitute, a full-feathered headdress, and face paint. He rallied the crowds at athletic events and performed a barefoot war dance. People were crazy about the chief. It made for a wonderful spectacle, the music rising as he twirled and stomped. The fans whooped, filled with happy, warlike feelings. They didn't see the harm in it. The chief had been born out of Latter-day Whites' wistful nostalgia for spirit animals and hunting grounds and tribal solidarity and everything else that had been vanquished and done away with. It was the same impulse that had produced those old-time summer camps, Camp Wachita and the like, with their own made-up Indian rituals and titles. It had been a long struggle to retire the chief, to suggest, to plant the idea that a white boy dressed up like a Wild West show Indian and dancing an ersatz dance was in some way not right. He was gone now, one more thing that had been taken away by officious outsiders. The resistance was still active and defiant. There was an unofficial chief who dressed up and lurked around during games, and the band still played his music, at least until now. Anyway, she said, "I will never understand why you care so much about a made-up Indian. You aren't even an alum." Neither was she. Her husband had gone to a JC for a couple of years, and she had graduated from a small Lutheran school. It's the university's business what they do. They're disrespecting their fans. How many years have I bought season tickets, football and basketball both? Doesn't that count for something, huh? At this tedious point in the discussion, argument, she usually drifted away, genuinely not caring and more than a little bored. But today she was impatient with his outrage, which was only an excuse to be mad about something. She said, "I bet you'd feel different about the chief if you were a real Indian. I bet you'd be offended." "I would not." His automatic denial. Whatever she said, he declared himself in opposition. "You're just saying that. You don't know." "Well, neither do you, and there haven't been Indians here for the last 150 years. They got smallpox or got run off to Oklahoma or something, so there's nobody to be offended, all right?" She should not have said offended. It was a wimpy little word. She needed a word that summoned up tomahawks and scalpings. She sniffed and turned away and let him gloat. Of course he had contempt for the Indians. They had lost. That afternoon, their daughter called. She was good about calling. Their son was less good, but that was to be expected of boys. Their daughter went to school in a neighboring state. Their son went to school in a different state in the opposite direction. It had just worked out that way. Neither of them had any passionate attachment to the chief. "What's new with you guys?" her daughter asked her after she had given an account of her classes and her roommates and what her mother assumed was a highly edited account of her love life. Your father and I got into an argument about the chief. I said that the Indians, Native Americans, the Native Americans probably thought the chief was disrespectful to them. Oh, they totally do. Why were you even talking about it? What happened? Nothing, she told her daughter, because she had already forgotten exactly why he'd been yowling and stomping around. Nothing very important. Why are you two always arguing? It's depressing. He started it, said her mother, in a fair imitation of the daughter when she was younger and fighting with her brother. It makes me think twice about getting married. Well, think 3 or 4 times. Mom, the daughter protested, because she was not half as cynical as she wished to be, and she had to tell her daughter that she was kidding. But she wasn't. Why did people get married anyway? Well, love, and most everybody else was doing it, and you wanted children, didn't you? The love part was embarrassing to her now. What had they been thinking? All that grinning and nudging and pawing at each other. She explained it to herself this way. They were no longer the same people they had been. The marriage certificate was a treaty they now chafed against, a negotiated settlement in the war between men and women. You wanted the real thing, true love and forever. Who didn't? The old yearning to be cherished and possessed, to cherish and possess in turn. You staked so much on that one choice. Then there were disappointments which you told yourself were only to be expected. Then you got used to disappointments and found yourself just going along, one foot in front of the other, and then at some point you became a ball and chain. Once, a few years ago, she had gone to see a counselor. The counselor asked if there was any physical or verbal abuse in the home, coercion of any sort, deprivation, financial pressures. No, I wouldn't say that. She shifted in her chair. It seemed as if perhaps she had nothing much to complain about. How about sex? Is that a problem? Only with my husband. Beg your pardon? She murmured something along the lines of, at their ages, and what did you expect? The counselor talked about taking responsibility for her own happiness and recommended that she develop some new interests and activities. She listened, nodding her head in agreement, thanked the counselor at the end of the session, and never went back. The newspaper ran another story about the chief and the music for the chief. This was important to many people, and they wrote letters to the editor about it. They talked about school spirit and tradition. She hadn't thought very much about school spirit before, why one school should go to war with another over football or anything else. It seemed like another one lost thing. Plenty of people agreed with the letter writers and wrote in to say so. Plenty of people did not, and they said so too. At least her husband was not the kind who wrote letters, and so she was spared that. You had to marvel at how exercised people could get about such a thing. There were almost no actual Indians involved in this fight, only these other people who had passionate opinions about Indians. The public library sponsored a talk by a Native American scholar, a man who was a member of a recognized tribe as well as having a Ph.D. in Native American studies. That part amused her because although she understood that it was a serious discipline, it made it sound as if you might be getting a degree in yourself. Nobody ever quite got her particular sense of humor. On the evening of the talk, she announced to her husband she was going to the library. He was mistrustful. "What's at the library?" he asked, watching her gather her keys and wallet and eyeglasses, checking her hair in the hall mirror. "Books." She couldn't resist. He made a sour face because he should have seen that one coming. She said, "You should try reading one sometime. You might learn something." She didn't want to tell him about the Native American speaker. He'd only start jeering and saying sarcastic things. She'd have to check out some mysteries to bring home as part of her cover story. Oh, funny. He kept up his moody staring. It wasn't as if she was dressed up for a night on the town. She was wearing her usual black knit pants, tennis shoes, sweater, car coat. She didn't care what she looked like anymore, and neither did anybody else. Come with me if you want to, she told him, knowing that was a surefire way to keep him from doing so. He rolled his eyes, muttered, and went back to the television room. The library was a handsome new building with a bright glassed-in lobby and groupings of comfortable chairs among the shelves of books. A friendly, harmless place where librarians helped people find things, where you could learn about butterflies or bridges or anything else in the world. It depressed her to think how tame an adventure this was, and here she'd been thinking of it like some secret rendezvous. The library, for God's sake. The small auditorium was off to one side. A few people were already seated there, none of them anyone she recognized. The room filled up. Some of the audience knew each other and stood in little groups talking. She guessed from the serious, studious look of them that this was the anti-chief crowd. Fans of the chief would be home watching television and stewing in grievance like her husband. The speaker was a little disappointing. He wore glasses and a suit, and he looked like any ordinary white man except that he wore his graying hair in long braids. And instead of a tie, there was a Western-style bolo at his neck. But what were Indians supposed to look like anyway? She had trouble paying attention to his talk. He said things like cultural appropriation and racialized entertainments, and while she understood such words, it tended to squeeze the juice out of the argument. There was nothing in it that would have moved her husband 3 feet away from his opinions. Bored and trying not to be, she looked around at the other audience members. Nobody but the speaker looked like, she had to stop saying Indian, looked like a Native American. They were probably professors. They were following along intently. She guessed they already spoke this particular language. The speaker referred to discourse. Yes, that's what it was. Not talking. Discourse. Sometimes she thought about taking a few university courses if she could get in as a part-time student. She still needed to come up with some interests and activities. She was smart enough to do the coursework, and she'd get the assignments done on time without any excuses about broken computers or oversleeping or whatever the kids came up with when they'd been screwing around. But she'd never done anything about enrolling. She and her second-rate education would never belong here. Her husband didn't belong here either, no matter how much he cheered on the teams. When it came down to actual membership, the university was its own tribe. The speaker was wrapping things up. He had reached some conclusion that everyone agreed with, to judge from the head nodding in the audience. He summoned up notions like capitalism and colonization and identity. He had been saying pretty much the same thing since he started speaking, so it was hard to see why people were so excited about it now. But there was applause. Then some people had questions that went on for a long time. On the edges of the room, others got up to leave, and so did she. At a table in the bright and noisy lobby, 3 kids who looked like college students, wearing T-shirts reading "Support Indigenous Rights," were passing out literature and clipboards. "Would you like to sign up for our mailing list?" one of them asked her. "Would you like to support oppressed people?" She guessed she would when you put it that way. They gave her a clipboard, and she wrote down her name and contact information. It wasn't that hard a thing to do, writing your name, and then you could feel all virtuous and involved. She had a tendency to be sarcastic. Everyone said so, everyone mostly being her husband. "Do you ever get people to change their minds?" she asked. "They hear the arguments and decide the chief is a bad idea?" "Sure," one of the kids said, "all the time." "Really? Now that I've listened to your side of things, I guess you're right. They tell you that?" The kid stared at her. He had big black-framed glasses and a beard that was growing in patchy. He was probably the same age as her son. When you were young, it was easier to get excited about ideas than shave them off when they no longer suited you. You hadn't yet grown that more stubborn adult hide. The kid thought she was giving him a hard time. We educate them about the history of genocide and exploitation. Yes, she said, never mind, I was making a joke. My husband's a big Chief fan. I can't imagine him giving it up. We have some literature. The kid rummaged around on the table and gave her a handful of pamphlets. Sure, thanks. She took them so as to be polite, the way you took things from the Jehovah's Witnesses who came to the door. Did anybody ever convert because of them? When she got home, her husband asked her how the library was, half mockingly, as if a library was a foolish sort of place. She said that it had been busy. The university's homecoming weekend would be here soon. The unofficial chief, the one who skulked around the football games, was going to put in an appearance in the homecoming parade. This meant that there would be an imitation version of the original fake Indian on display. It was enough to make your head hurt. She wondered if anyone could even agree on what a real Indian was, or if they did, would it make a very good mascot, that is, symbol. You wouldn't want to show ordinary real people filling prescriptions at the drugstore or working on their cars. People wanted fake Indians or nothing. Her husband said, "This is the start of something big. Wait and see. The chief is coming back." Really? It's a grassroots movement. People will stand up and be counted. They won't be able to ignore us anymore. We'll have the chief back at half times. We'll see him dancing again. Would that make you happy, beating up on the Indians one more time? It's not about the Indians. She waved a hand, cutting him off. Yes, I know. It's about tradition, honor, pride. She remembered a word the speaker had used, hegemony. Hedge what? Winning. Like the good old football team. Well, of course you want your team to win. What's wrong with that? Because that means somebody else has to lose. Her husband studied her. He seemed to find her interesting but off-putting, like a dead bird or some large, sticky-looking bug. That's kind of a crazy thing to say. Are you turning into one of those crazy women? For homecoming weekend, the weather fell off the edge of a cliff and landed in winter. The day of the parade, a wet and fitful snow fell, just enough to smear the crepe paper on the floats and make their papier-mâché ornaments. Football helmets, goalposts, scoreboards predicting victory wobble like underdone cakes. She took her winter coat from the back of the closet. There had not yet been time to go through the coat closet and organize it, and she found a wad of old Kleenex in one pocket. It was her husband's night for card playing. He and his buddies gathered in another man's basement that had been outfitted with a bar and a card table and big puffy leather furniture, and complained about their wives. She imagined her husband saying, "The little woman's going crazy on me," and another of the men saying, "They're all crazy." Then they would drink more beer and congratulate themselves on not being crazy women. At least this meant she could leave the house without explaining herself or making up a story. She couldn't remember the last time she and her husband left the house together to go somewhere at night. When had that happened or stopped happening? How old was that Kleenex in her coat pocket? Their overgrown college town was easy to navigate. She knew the parade route, where it began and ended, and where there was likely to be the most trouble. This was the strip that passed the campus bars and all the pizza and sandwich shops. She almost never went down there. Why should she? Campus was where serious, celebrated people did important, incomprehensible work, and the students ran wild in ways she did not wish to consider, since her own children were no doubt off doing the same things. She herself had exactly gone off the rails at her Lutheran college. It was not a place that allowed for such misbehavior. She guessed she'd missed her chance. Then she'd married young and had her babies right away. She hadn't expected anything much different except, of course, the foolish belief in love and happiness. And now she guessed she was brooding about her lost opportunities and getting mad in ways that didn't help anything and taking it all out on the poor, dumb chief. Year by year, piece by piece, some other self had built up in her, or maybe it was a process of chipping away, whittling down to reveal the self she'd always been beneath that layer of obliging girl, dry, impatient, judgmental. Year after year, her husband lost his easy good humor and embraced his discontents. Heaven help them both. She drove with care through the busy campus streets and parked as close as she could in an alley behind one of the businesses. It was probably illegal, but the police would have their hands full with the parade. She walked out of the darkness of the alley to join the crowd on the sidewalks. Students, most of them, but some older people, too. Everyone was excited, talking among themselves, their breaths coming out in frost puffs. Everybody but her was wearing some kind of school regalia, coats or stocking caps or hooded sweatshirts. She really should go out and buy a few team things. It would be a harmless way to make her husband happy. You couldn't tell by looking at people if they were for or against the chief, or cared one way or the other about him. You knew from the letters to the newspaper that there were such people on both sides. Why so much argument, so much of strife and accusation? The emails she'd received from the anti-chief organization had exhorted everyone to come out and demonstrate, let your voice be heard. She'd expected it to be more organized. She followed the crowd out to where everyone was waiting for the parade to appear. You could hear the dim noise of the marching band still some distance away. They were playing one of the school fight songs. Not the chief's war chant, but another one with words nobody knew very well but mumbled along to at the games. The cold made her huddle inside her coat. Her glasses fogged when she breathed. Looking around, she saw police officers standing at intervals along the curb. A line of students was moving along the sidewalk, threading their way through the crowd. They carried poster board signs scrawled with words, "No," and "Racism," and "Stop." Should she join them? Her stomach squeezed in on itself, a small, cowardly lurch. What if there was trouble? What if she wound up in the newspaper as a mugshot looking bleary and criminal? The band music was crashing down on them by now, advancing along the street. Then they came into view, splendid in their fancy uniforms, all gold buttons and gold braid. There were a great many of them. They were like a long freight train when you were stuck at a crossing. A man and woman standing next to her were pointing at the sign-carrying students. "Look at them," the man said, "troublemakers." "They should be ashamed of themselves," the woman agreed. They were an older couple, small, gray-haired, bundled up in down jackets and mufflers in the school colors. They resembled a set of matched salt and pepper shakers. "They need to learn some lessons. Show a little respect." "Policeman, do your duty," the old man said. Even with the puffy jacket enveloping him, he had a spry, thin grasshopper look. He saw her watching and scowled. "Knuckleheads," he said, "them and their so-called education." "Spoiled crybabies," the old woman chimed in. The old man snorted and exhaled new clouds of frost. "I suppose you don't agree," he said, turning to take her in. But she wasn't thinking about the chief just then. She was thinking about how some old married couples were like this, paired off, echoing each other's righteous likes and dislikes, forming a solid front against the world. That happened. Who were they? Were they happy? She said, "Well, the Indians, the Native American people, they have some objections." "Ah, Native American, don't make me laugh. By now they're mixed up with everybody else, white and black and yellow. Most of them run casinos. They make heap big money." The last of the band was passing by, and a new kind of noise was approaching, a mix of hooting, clapping, and shouted words she couldn't make out. The policeman on the curb stepped out into the street, trying to see what was coming. The students with the signs, She thought she recognized the boy from the library. In the street also, circling. "Looky there," the old man said, pointing. "I bet they're all communists." "People aren't communists anymore," she argued. "It's a discredited system." "That's exactly what the communists want you to think." She walked away from them then. A car was approaching, a convertible with 2 students in back, a boy and a girl waving to the crowd. They wore costume shop crowns, wool scarves, and heavy winter coats. The homecoming king and queen. It was a little surprising that schools still did that sort of thing. You'd guess they'd be over it, like communism. 3 more convertibles followed, slow-moving, their polished hoods and fenders reflecting the streetlights. They carried the university deans, members of the student government, the football coach. So the banners on the sides of the cars announced. Maybe the chief had been scared off? No, here he was, walking, not riding. It was hard to see him at first because of all the people milling around him, shouting and chanting, and because he was unexpectedly short. The chief's suit wasn't a good fit for him, and the feathered headdress had slipped down almost to the bridge of his nose. His arms were crossed over his chest in the resolute pose of a warrior. But as he came closer and the swarm of people stopped just short of where she stood, she could see the dread in his eyes, waiting to be punched out or tackled. It looked as if something like that might happen, either to the chief or somebody else. The street was blocked by the crowd. The chief shuffled along for a few paces, then stopped, trapped. The students, the ones with the signs, were moving in a running ring around him, trying to steer him off course. One of them had a bullhorn and was shouting into it, though the words came out garbled by feedback. At the same time, another group, this one made up of Chief's supporters, was shouting and pushing back. It was hard to tell the 2 sides apart since they were all of them bundled up against the cold in bulky jackets and knit caps and gloves, as if 2 gangs of snowmen were shoving each other around. "Racist? You're the one who's racist. You want to get rid of all the Native American heritage on campus." "I'm a racist?" The student who was holding one of the signs was black. "Really? That's the best you can do?" "You and your diversity agenda suck. And you need to educate yourself about Native American historical and intergenerational trauma. Listen to you. I bet you were the smartest kid in the 7th grade." The police had waded in by now, trying to keep the 2 sides separate. The chief's supporters were getting the worst of it from what she could see. They were outnumbered and less mobilized. Some of them looked like students also. What made people choose sides in the first place? Her phone buzzed. She had to take off her gloves and dig into a coat pocket to find it. There was a text from her husband, who must have come home early. "Where are you?" She contemplated the screen for a moment, then texted back, "Little Bighorn." Then she turned the phone off and replaced it in her pocket. Now there was a new commotion because the rest of the parade behind the chief was backing up and jamming the space. A high school band had stalled out just short of the crowd, still playing or trying to, in a blast of expiring trumpets and scattershot drums. Where was the chief? She'd lost sight of him. The police waded in. They bawled orders that nobody could hear. A police cruiser, its red and blue lights whirling, advanced towards the crowd from the opposite direction. People cleared a space for it, still shouting and chanting. Where was the chief? Nobody seemed to know. Had he escaped or been spirited away or kidnapped? A beat of silence before the racket started up again. Accusations, swearing, the high school band regrouping, marching in place and launching into a spirited Sousa march. Her fingers and toes were icy. She started back to the car. You forgot how often everything on campus ended up in a blather of words and nothing else. Discourse. But it hadn't been just words back in the days of the young country, the days before there even was a country. Just a few shiploads of miserable, starving white settlers huddling inside their wretched lean-tos. The tribes had felt sorry for them, brought them corn and squash and venison. Their first mistake. Then all that bloody history. God, but it was cold. She was stumbling along, thinking miserable thoughts, bumping into people. The raids at dawn, the burned forts, the unburied dead, cruelty on both sides, the long and unimaginable project of displacement and extermination. She felt sorry for all the dead and dispossessed. She felt sorry for herself. Where was her car? Here was the alley. She reached for her keys. Something in the darkness ahead shifted and thumped. She froze in place. A figure was crouched down behind her car, peering over the trunk. "Hey, what are you doing?" "Nothing." Muffled, young. At least he didn't sound like a mugger. "Get out of there. That's my car." The boy stood up, though he hung back and turned his face away from the light. She said, "Say, aren't you—" "Keep it down, would you?" The chief, or the boy who'd been the chief, ducked behind her car again as people passed on the sidewalk behind them. "What are you doing?" she demanded. "What does it look like I'm doing?" He was hopping around on one leg, and when she came closer, she saw that he was wrestling with his costume, trying to peel his Indian breeches off over his jeans and tennis shoes. Feathered headdress and fringed shirt were already on the ground next to him. Some warrior you are. Hey, I didn't sign up for this. People cursing me out and throwing shit." The chief gave another yank at the breeches and came close to toppling over. "Take your shoes off first." She passed him a Kleenex from her purse. "And you might want to do something about your war paint." He scrubbed at the paint, smearing it. "Does that help?" "Not really. When did you start being the chief, the unchief?" "Just this semester. It's messed up. You don't get any respect." He got the pants off with his shoe still stuck inside one leg. He pulled the shoe loose. He looked very young and unchief-like, blue-eyed, fair-haired, Celtic. She found another Kleenex for him. "What were you thinking? Did you expect that everybody was going to be happy about seeing the chief again, after all the commotion?" "Oh, it sounded like fun." "Really?" "I thought it'd help me get into a frat." He jammed the shoe back on and limped past her to the alley entrance. "You forgot these," she said, indicating the pile of discarded chief clothes on the pavement, the leather shirt and breeches, the tangle of feathers. But he was already gone. She nudged at the pile with her foot. There was something distasteful about it, as if some large creature had been captured and skinned. But it didn't seem right to abandon the costume there. She scooped everything up with difficulty and put it in the back seat. She reached her own driveway, pulled into the garage, and rolled the door down behind her. The headdress was bulky, with its two tails of feathers tangled together. She hoped they were not real feathers, that no one had killed any birds to get them, but she was pretty sure they were and had. She smoothed the feathers with her hand. They had a silky feel. Then she put the whole contraption on her head. The weight of it staggered her. With difficulty she managed the 2 steps from the garage to the house and into the kitchen. She balanced carefully, one slow foot at a time. She felt the heaviness dragging her down. It was the sorrowful weight of history, injustice, murder, grievance. Her husband called out to her from the television room. It was argument and spite. It was impatience and resentment. It was a ball and chain. She reached the television room and her husband began to speak, but the sight of her turned him silent and gaping. She stopped in the center of the room, adjusted the headdress, and waited to see what would come out of her mouth. "Peace," she said.